The evening was warm, yet the air inside the lavishly decorated living room felt cold and hostile. A group of men sat laughing, glasses of whiskey clinking, smoke from their cigars staining the air with arrogance. Among them sat Raghav, tall, broad-shouldered and proud of his wealth. His laughter boomed the loudest, his words dripping with ego, as if the entire world was his to command. But behind the closed kitchen door, Mira, his pregnant wife, stood silently, holding her stomach protectively. She was only 6 months along, yet every step felt heavier because of the emotional weight she carried. She had loved Raghav deeply, sacrificing her dreams, cutting ties with her family just to be with him. But tonight she would learn what kind of man he truly was. "Mira, bring more snacks!" Raghav barked from the living room, his voice dripping with impatience. She rushed in, balancing a tray of samosas and chutney. Her hands trembled slightly, not because of the weight, but because of the piercing stares of Raghav's friends, who whispered and smirked, throwing crude jokes in her direction. She kept her head low, placing the tray gently on the table. One of the men chuckled. "Raghav, your wife is still so quiet. Does she ever speak, or is she just trained to serve?" The room erupted in laughter. Mira's heart sank. She looked at Raghav, praying he would defend her. But instead he smirked, leaned back and said, "That's what a good wife is supposed to do. Silent, obedient, useful." Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she said nothing. She knew the danger of arguing in front of his friends. Moments later, as she turned to leave, one of the men muttered something foul about her appearance. Raghav, drunk with pride and alcohol, suddenly stood, grabbed her arm, and in front of everyone, kicked her harshly in the side. Mira gasped, stumbling to the floor, her hands clutching her stomach. A sharp pain tore through her body, and for a moment, she thought she would lose her baby. The room fell silent. Some of his friends looked shocked, others laughed nervously, but not one of them stepped forward to help her. Raghav sneered. "Pathetic. Can't even carry a child without whining. Get up and stop embarrassing me." Mira's vision blurred with tears, but inside her heart, something shifted. The woman who once endured humiliation for love began to shatter, piece by piece, leaving behind something stronger. She pushed herself up slowly, her face pale but her eyes burning with quiet fury. She said nothing, only looked at Raghav, long enough for him to notice that her silence wasn't submission anymore. It was a promise. A storm was coming. As she walked back into the kitchen, clutching her belly, she whispered to herself, "For my child, I will endure tonight. But one day, Raghav, you will pay for every tear, every wound, every insult. And when that day comes, no one will save you, not even your so-called friends." The camera of fate was turning, and the seeds of revenge had just been planted. Weeks passed since that humiliating night, but the bruises on Mira's body had healed far quicker than the wounds carved into her heart. Every time she touched her growing belly, she remembered Raghav's cruelty, the kick, the laughter of his friends, and the silence that followed. That silence became her strength. Mira stopped begging for love. She stopped expecting kindness. Instead, she began to plan. Behind her quiet eyes, she was weaving a future where her child would grow in dignity, far away from a man who treated them both like dirt. Raghav, blind in arrogance, had no idea. He carried on drinking, gambling, and flaunting his wealth. He thought Mira was still the same submissive wife who would endure everything. But he didn't notice the little changes. Mira no longer argued, no longer cried before him. She watched, she listened, and she prepared. One afternoon, when Raghav was out bragging to his friends, Mira secretly visited a lawyer. The lawyer, an elderly woman with kind eyes, listened as Mira revealed years of abuse, neglect, and humiliation. "You have more power than you think," the lawyer said firmly. "We can take everything from him, his money, his house, even his reputation. But most importantly, we can protect you and your child." Mira signed the papers with trembling hands, not from fear, but from determination. That signature wasn't just ink on paper, it was the first strike of her revenge. Days later, Raghav returned home to find officials waiting at his door. His bank accounts were frozen, His company shares were seized under investigation for fraud. Documents Mira had quietly gathered and handed to the authorities. His face turned pale for the first time in years. "What is this nonsense?" he shouted. The officer replied coldly, "Evidence of illegal transactions. Mr. Raghav, we'll see you in court." Raghav's friends, once loyal to his wealth, began to distance themselves. Without his money to buy their loyalty, he was nothing. But the final blow came in court. Raghav, expecting Mira to stand quietly as always, was stunned when she walked in wearing a simple sari, her head held high, her belly round with the child he once mocked. Her voice didn't shake as she told the judge everything, every insult, every wound, every night of abuse. "You called me silent and obedient," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "But my silence was not weakness. It was strength gathering itself, and today that strength will bury you." The courtroom was silent. Raghav, once so proud, now sat trembling, tears filling his eyes, not from regret, but from fear. He was sentenced to prison for fraud, stripped of his wealth, and ordered never to approach Mira or her child again. As he was led away in handcuffs, Raghav turned back, his face streaked with tears. Mira didn't look at him with pity. She looked at him with finality, as if closing the last chapter of a painful book. Outside the court, Mira placed her hand on her stomach and whispered, "You will never know a father's cruelty, my child. You will only know your mother's strength." The crowd outside applauded her courage, and for the first time in years, Mira smiled, not because her pain was gone, but because she had transformed it into power. Raghav had kicked her down in front of his friends, but she had risen higher than he ever imagined. His tears were her justice.